I drove 4 hours to the VIP restaurant opening I personally guaranteed with $75,000 of my own credit. At the entrance, my mother blocked my path. She smiled at the billionaire investor beside her, then pointed me toward the service alley. "Eleanor, this is just the accounting consultant we hired," my mother said smoothly. "She knows to use the back doors." I stood there in my tailored suit, watching my own family erase my existence to protect my brother's ego. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I would love to know where you are listening from. The evening air in Charleston carried the faint scent of salt and expensive perfume. The valet had just taken my keys. I stood on the pristine gravel path leading up to Tyler's Coastal Cuisine, a venture built entirely on $75,000 of my corporate credit capability. I looked past Patricia's rigid posture. Through the grand, heavy oak doors, I could see the ambient lighting illuminating imported orchids. $2,000 right there. I saw the gleam of the commercial-grade open kitchen in the back. $40,000 of leased equipment. Every single piece of it existed tonight solely because I had signed the guarantor paperwork 3 months ago. Patricia gripped her designer clutch, her knuckles turning white. She was terrified. I could see the microsecond of panic flashing behind her perfectly manicured eyelashes. She expected me to make a scene. She expected the desperate, unloved daughter to finally snap, to raise my voice, to beg for my rightful seat at the table in front of Eleanor and the other Charleston elites. She braced herself for an emotional explosion that would ruin her golden boy's perfect evening. I gave her nothing of the sort. I did not cry. I did not ask her why she was doing this. When you spend your life auditing multi-million-dollar corporate mergers, you learn very quickly how to identify a dead asset. You learn that arguing with a bankrupt partner is a waste of breath. You simply cut your losses and initiate the foreclosure. I looked at Eleanor, the matriarch investor who valued self-made entrepreneurs, and offered her a polite, measured, perfectly corporate smile. A simple nod of acknowledgement from one professional to another. Then, I let my eyes drift back to Patricia. I let the silence stretch for just a moment too long enough for her to feel the absolute void of my emotional investment. I slowly turned on my heel. The gravel crunched softly beneath my designer shoes. I walked back toward the valet stand, my posture completely straight, my breathing entirely normal. The valet looked deeply confused as I handed him my claim ticket just 5 minutes after arriving. The night air felt entirely different now. It felt clearer, sharper. It was exactly 7:45 on a Friday evening. I stepped into my car and closed the heavy door, sealing out the noise of the party I had funded. I rested my hands on the leather steering wheel. The engine hummed to life. Who am I? I am a 34-year-old partner at a premier corporate financial consulting firm in Atlanta. I spend my days restructuring corporate debt, analyzing complex mergers, and auditing portfolios that dwarf the net worth of everyone currently sipping champagne inside that building. I wear tailored suits, I command boardrooms, and men twice my age wait for my financial projections before making a move. But to my family, to Gary and Patricia, I was nothing more than an emergency fund. I was the invisible wallet they kept safely tucked away until the bills came due. Tyler, on the other hand, was the golden boy, 28 years old, with perfectly styled hair and a charismatic smile that could sell a broken watch. He was the visionary, the creative genius. He had launched a tech startup straight out of college. It failed spectacularly. He tried an artisan coffee roastery, bankrupt in 8 months. Gary and Patricia always blamed the market fluctuations. They blamed the unpredictable economy or unsupportive partners. They never once blamed Tyler. And every single time, the golden boy stumbled and fell. The accounting consultant was expected to silently sweep up the broken glass and cover the deficit. For this restaurant, Tyler wanted to go big. He courted traditional Charleston money. He wooed Eleanor, a woman known for heavily backing self-made, hard-working entrepreneurs who pulled themselves up by their bootstraps. Tyler painted a beautiful portrait of himself as a lone wolf who built his culinary dream from scratch through sheer grit. Having his older, highly successful sister there, the one who actually held the credit and secured the capital, would instantly shatter that lucrative illusion. Patricia understood this dynamic perfectly. So, I was immediately demoted to the hired help, a vendor, someone who uses the service elevator so the guests don't have to look at her. Sitting in my idling car, I watched the shadows of the guests mingling through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Women in expensive silk dresses, men in crisp linen suits. It was a perfectly curated image of success. But I knew the real numbers. I knew the exact, suffocating interest rate on the loans Gary took out against his own retirement home just to pay for the interior design. I knew the precise payment schedule for the commercial ovens that Tyler had completely ignored. I knew the fragile house of cards they were currently dancing inside. It was a beautiful, glittering structure, but it was built entirely on my foundation. If I walked away, if I pulled my support, gravity would do the rest. I sat in the driver's seat, breathing evenly. I was no longer a hurt daughter. I was a senior financial analyst evaluating a severe breach of contract. The illusion was incredibly fragile. I was just about to shift the car into drive and leave Charleston behind forever when a tiny movement caught my eye. At the side of the restaurant, tucked away near the dark service entrance Patricia had so generously offered me, there was a small, frosted window. It belonged to the staff break room. The harsh fluorescent light was on inside. A small shadow pressed against the glass. A tiny hand reached up and wiped away the condensation. It was Mia. She was 8 years old. She had Tyler's striking eyes, but absolutely none of his arrogance. She was the quiet, inconvenient collateral damage of his messy past, the result of a brief college romance that ended before she was even born. Tyler rarely saw her. Gary and Patricia treated her like an awkward footnote to their son's grand narrative of success. I was the one who quietly paid her private school tuition every semester. I bought her winter coats and sent her books about astronomy for her birthdays. I was the one who made sure her mother had enough money for groceries when Tyler decided his artisanal coffee dream was vastly more important than paying his court-ordered child support. And tonight, on the supposed biggest, most glamorous night of her father's life, she was shoved into a windowless, concrete break room with a cheap tablet and a plate of cold French fries. Why? Because a single father with a messy custody arrangement did not fit the curated aesthetic. It didn't appeal to strict, traditional investors like Eleanor. Tyler wanted to be seen as the young, unencumbered visionary with limitless potential. So, he simply erased his own daughter for the evening, just like Patricia had erased me at the front door. I stared at that small silhouette against the frosted glass. Mia was watching the expensive luxury cars pull up. She was watching a beautiful party she was explicitly not allowed to attend. Something deep inside me, a heavy dam that had held back decades of toxic resentment and familial duty, finally cracked wide open. It wasn't just about me anymore. It wasn't about the insult at the door or the money I had spent. It was about the vicious cycle repeating itself. The golden child was actively learning to discard people who didn't serve his immediate image. I watched Mia's little hand press flat against the cold glass. The professional, corporate detachment I had relied on to survive my family completely evaporated. It was instantly replaced by a cold, searing, diamond-hard clarity. I had funded this despicable charade. My signature was the only legal document keeping the lights on in that building. I had literally paid for the privilege of watching my sweet niece be treated like a dirty secret. I picked up my phone from the console. The charity ends tonight. I leaned my head back against the leather headrest and closed my eyes. The memories came uninvited, slipping through the cracks of my carefully built professional defenses. I was 16 years old when the pattern was established. My summer job savings, $300 earned from folding clothes at a retail store, quietly disappeared from my bedroom dresser because Tyler urgently needed new customized cleats for his baseball team. Gary told me not to make a fuss about it. He is your brother. Lauren, you have to support him. Support. It was a word that Patricia and Gary weaponized with lethal precision throughout my life. When I was 22, freshly graduated and living in a tiny, drafty studio apartment, I received a frantic phone call in the middle of the night. Tyler had totaled his car. He was highly intoxicated. Gary begged me, crying into the receiver, to wire $4,000 immediately to keep things quiet, to cover the property damages before the other driver decided to press criminal charges. I ate cheap instant noodles for 6 straight months to recover from that financial hit. When Tyler casually dropped out of college because it was stifling his creativity, I was the one who paid the massive penalty fees on his broken apartment lease. I kept a small black leather notebook tucked away in my desk drawer at home. Inside, I meticulously recorded every invoice, every emergency wire transfer, every late-night financial bailout. It wasn't because I wanted to collect the debt or charge them interest. It was because I desperately needed to prove to myself that I existed, that my heavy contributions were real. If I didn't write it down in ink, the money simply vanished into the massive void of Tyler's entitlement, and my profound sacrifice was completely erased from their memory. They never once said thank you. They just expected the next check to clear. They systematically trained me to believe that my worth in our family dynamic was directly, inextricably tied to my financial liquidity. I was not a beloved daughter. I was a financial contingency plan. If I ever stopped paying, I would stop mattering entirely. For years, I played their rigged game. I foolishly believed that one day, my undeniable competence and endless generosity would finally earn me a permanent seat at their dinner table. I thought they would eventually look at me with the same blind, unwavering adoration they reserved only for Tyler. But as I sat in the dark parking lot of his heavily financed restaurant, the ugly truth was undeniable. They didn't want a daughter. They wanted an ATM. And an ATM does not get invited to the fancy ribbon-cutting ceremony. It just dispenses cash silently from the wall. The cold air from the AC vent blew against my face. The black notebook was sitting in my apartment, filled with a decade of unacknowledged bailouts. But the biggest entry wasn't even in that book yet. It was the $75,000 legal guarantee hanging over the very building I was looking at. I opened my eyes. Patricia's cruelty didn't appear overnight. It was a slow, carefully curated erosion of my boundaries that spanned nearly 2 decades. Psychologists often talk about normalization, the process by which we accept abnormal, harmful behavior as a routine fact of life. In my family, this was the primary language we spoke. Whenever Patricia would dismiss my accomplishments to highlight Tyler's latest visionary project, she would do it with a soft, patronizing smile. "Don't be sensitive, Lauren," she'd say, pouring me a glass of iced tea as if that liquid sugar could wash away the sting. "Tyler has such a fragile spirit. You have to be the rock." They successfully reframed my exploitation as my primary familial virtue. By calling my financial bailouts support and my silence maturity, they turned my natural kindness into a weapon against me. I wasn't being used, I was being the bigger person. I wasn't being excluded, I was making things easier for everyone else. I was the designated rock that was expected to endure every seismic shift Tyler created, while he was the fragile spirit that needed to be protected from the harsh realities of the adult world. It was a masterclass in psychological conditioning. If they had been openly hateful, I would have walked away at 18. But they were kind in the most calculated ways possible, provided the checks didn't bounce. They were supportive, provided I stayed in my lane and didn't overshadow the golden boy. Normalization works because it's quiet. It doesn't scream. It whispers that you are lucky to be treated this way. I looked at the notes on my laptop screen, the list of debts, the broken promises, the thousands of dollars silently funneled into Tyler's endless stream of failed dreams. It wasn't love. It was a transaction. And for 20 years, I was the only one paying the bill. It was a very expensive lesson to learn. I decided to call Gloria. It was well past midnight in Atlanta, but I knew my aunt would still be awake. Gloria was the black sheep of the family, or so Patricia called her, because she refused to marry into money and instead opened a small, successful landscaping business that she ran with iron-fisted integrity. She was the one who taught me that family was not a synonym for doormat. When her voice finally crackled through the phone, it was steady and grounded. I didn't have to explain the situation in detail. One sentence about the service door and the accounting consultant lie was enough to make her silence go sharp. "They finally pushed you too far, didn't they?" she asked. "They used me, Gloria, again, and then they erased me when it became inconvenient for their image." Gloria didn't offer me empty platitudes. She didn't tell me to forgive and forget for the sake of the family unit. "You have been the foundation of that house for a long time, Lauren," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But you cannot build a healthy life on a foundation that doesn't respect the stone. If they want to treat you like a vendor, then it is time you start acting like one. Stop carrying them. You aren't their rock anymore. You're just their target." She reminded me of the time I was 12, and I had been forced to give my bicycle to Tyler because he had crashed his. And Patricia didn't want to hear him cry. I had spent that entire summer walking while he rode my bike in the driveway, and Gloria had been the one to sit with me on the porch and explain that some people are simply born without a capacity for empathy. "Do you have the leverage?" Lauren, she asked. "I have the contract," I whispered. "I have the control." "Then do what you do best," she said, before hanging up. "Audit the relationship. I felt the last vestiges of my guilt dissolve. I had been waiting for their permission to be angry, waiting for them to finally see me. But Gloria was right. I didn't need their permission. I had the ledger, and the account was officially closed. I took a deep breath, and for the first time that day, I felt completely steady. My office on the 32nd floor of the Atlanta skyline was my true home. Here, there were no golden children, no fragile spirits, and no one demanding that I be a rock. There was only data, efficiency, and cold, hard reality. My team respected me, not because I was someone's daughter, but because I could find the flaw in a $300 million acquisition in under an hour. I spent the next few days in a state of hyper-focused productivity. I didn't just review the Tyler situation. I audited my entire life's interaction with my family. I organized every transaction. I mapped out the timeline of Patricia's manipulation. I realized that my success was the very thing they feared, because a financially independent Lauren could not be controlled. The restaurant project was supposed to be Tyler's final push into the Charleston high society. He had spent his entire savings. Gary had mortgaged their home. And they were counting on the publicity from Eleanor's patronage to make Tyler's coastal cuisine the most profitable opening of the year. They had a PR firm handling the press, a high-end designer managing the aesthetics, and they were currently deep in the red. I looked at the calendar on my desk. The grand public opening was scheduled for 3 weeks away. That was when the big media outlets would be there, when the local influencers would arrive, and when the revenue would finally start to flow. But the invoices from the equipment company and the PR firm were due for payment in full on the Tuesday following the VIP opening. They thought they had until the end of the month to figure out how to bridge the cash flow gap. They thought I was going to provide a bridge. They were working off a set of assumptions that was about to be completely invalidated. My corporate firm was handling the restructuring of the very equipment company that supplied the kitchen. The paperwork I had signed didn't just give me oversight. It gave me the absolute right to freeze the payments if I determined the operator, Tyler, was not meeting the operational standards. I wasn't just holding the debt, I was holding the switch. I didn't share my plan with anyone else, not even Gloria. This was a financial move, and it needed to be precise. I watched the clock tick on my wall, waiting for the perfect moment to execute the shutdown. The countdown had begun. 3 months ago, the scene in Patricia's living room was entirely different. I had arrived in Charleston for a weekend visit, hoping to mend some fences. Tyler had been pacing the floor, looking like a man who had seen a ghost. Patricia was sitting on the sofa, her hands clasped, her face a mask of practiced distress. "Lauren, honey," she began, the tone so thick with saccharine sweetness it felt suffocating. "We are so close to the finish line. The kitchen layout is done, the menus are ready, but the supplier is insisting on the final balance for the equipment. Tyler just needs a little bit of breathing room." I stood by the window, watching the waves hit the pier. I knew exactly how many times Tyler had just needed a little breathing room in his life. I saw Gary looking at the floor, refusing to meet my gaze. He knew, deep down, that this was wrong. He knew they were putting their daughter in an impossible position for the sake of their son's vanity. "How much?" I asked. My voice kept strictly professional. $75,000. Tyler blurted out, a bit too quickly. "Just for a few weeks. Eleanor is going to invest a huge amount once the doors are open. It's a lock." I remembered the look on Eleanor's face when I met her briefly at a charity gala the month before. She was sharp, observant, and she clearly didn't think much of Tyler's visionary pitches. She invested in people, not kitchens. "I can provide the guarantee," I said, and their faces instantly lit up with the kind of joy reserved for a lottery win. "But I have conditions. This is a commercial venture. I need oversight. I need a copy of every operational expense. And I need the right to pause payments if I see financial mismanagement." Tyler laughed it off, barely even looking at the paper. "Sure, Lauren. Whatever makes you feel secure." He signed the document. Patricia didn't even read it. She was already mentally spending the money on high-end table settings. They didn't see a contract. They saw an infinite resource. They were so blinded by their own greed and their need to make Tyler look like a success that they didn't realize they were signing a weaponized instrument of their own destruction. I had carefully drafted that document with the help of my firm's legal team, ensuring every clause was bulletproof. I didn't need to be mean. I just needed to be precise. I had bought them the restaurant, and today I realized I had also bought the right to take it away. The beauty of the contract wasn't just in the legal language, it was in the simplicity of it. I had stipulated that the guarantee would be triggered only after the kitchen passed a final inspection for operational viability. I had also ensured that the guarantor me had the authority to audit the books at any time before the final release of funds. It was a classic financial hedge, something I did for my clients every single day. The fact that the client happened to be my brother, who had spent his life treating me like a disposable asset, made the logic behind it even more sound. If I were a bank and Tyler was a borrower, I would have flagged his profile as high risk years ago. I sat in my office and pulled up the digital copy of the contract. I highlighted the clause regarding the management of funds. It was the only part of the agreement that mattered. Tyler was notorious for cutting corners. He wanted the best equipment, but he had already started hinting at using cheaper, second-hand installation services to save money for interior decor. That was a clear violation of the operational viability clause. I looked at my desk clock, 7 days before the invoices were due. I had everything I needed. I had the contract. I had the proof of his financial irresponsibility. And now, thanks to Patricia's stunt at the door, I had the moral justification to walk away. I was not the one who broke the family. I was just the one who stopped paying for the facade. Most people are terrified of legal documents. They find them cold, intimidating, and distant. But for me, they were the ultimate equalizer. You can yell at a lawyer, you can scream at your sister, you can lie to your investors, but you cannot yell at a signed and notarized contract. It doesn't care about your tears, your excuses, or your fragile ego. It only cares about the terms. And the terms were very clear. I had spent my life trying to be the support. I was finally ready to be the auditor. I closed the file, leaned back, and watched the sunset paint the Atlanta skyline in shades of orange and purple. The work was done. Everything was ready for Monday morning. I was ready. The signs of my impending exclusion were not sudden. They were a series of quiet, deliberate choices made in the weeks leading up to the grand opening. Looking back, the isolation was a meticulously constructed wall, built brick by brick to ensure I remained on the outside of their glittering new reality. It started with the email threads. Tyler had initially CC'd me on the correspondence with the interior designer and the marketing firm. He needed my approval for the initial deposits. Of course. But once the $75,000 was fully secured and the vendor accounts were active, My email address mysteriously fell off the distribution lists. I noticed it immediately. You do not survive in high-stakes corporate finance by missing the details. When I casually brought it up during a Sunday phone call, Patricia was exceptionally quick with her defense. Her voice was light and breezy, the tone she used when she was lying through her teeth. She claimed they simply did not want to bother me with the trivial operational details. She said I was far too busy with my important clients in Atlanta to worry about the colour of the linen napkins or the final tasting menu. Then came the social media posts. Tyler's Instagram account became a daily broadcast of his rising status in Charleston. I saw pictures of him clinking champagne glasses with local influencers. I saw the highly stylized photos of the signature seafood dishes being prepared in the pristine, stainless steel kitchen I had financed. Patricia commented on every single photo, calling him her brilliant, self-made visionary. I was never mentioned. Not a single word of gratitude. Not a single tag acknowledging the silent partner holding the entire structure together. I should have pulled the plug right then. The red flags were practically blocking out the sun. But the trap of normalization is incredibly difficult to escape. A small, foolish part of me still hoped that this time would be different. I convinced myself that perhaps they were just overwhelmed with the stress of launching a business. I gave them every conceivable benefit of the doubt. I booked my flight, paid for my own luxury hotel room, and drove to the venue, fully prepared to stand quietly in the background and simply be proud of my brother. I gave them one last, definitive chance to treat me like a human being instead of a bank. They failed the test. They chose the illusion over their own daughter, and in doing so, they unknowingly activated the exact legal mechanism I had installed to protect myself. The silence from my end was not ignorance. It was observation. They made their choice. Sitting in the driver's seat of my car, parked just 50 yards from the restaurant's service entrance, the ambient glow of the streetlights cast long shadows across the dashboard. The image of 8-year-old Mia, hidden away in a concrete break room with a plate of cold fries, burned brilliantly in my mind. She was the collateral damage of Tyler's vanity, entirely erased from the narrative because a child did not fit the aesthetic of a young, unattached culinary genius. I pulled out my phone. I opened a blank digital note. I didn't write a message to Patricia, nor did I draft an angry text to Tyler. Instead, I wrote something else entirely. If you're listening to this right now, maybe you know exactly how this feels. Maybe you are the one who always pays the bill. You are the responsible one, the stable one, the one who quietly absorbs the financial hits, the emotional neglect, and the subtle insults, all while telling yourself that this is simply what family does. You wire the emergency funds, you co-sign the leases, you fix the broken pieces they leave behind. You build a beautiful, sturdy table with your own 2 hands, and then you sit quietly in the corner while they feast, hoping they will eventually invite you to pull up a chair. I wrote this note to the version of myself that spent 20 years trying to buy a seat at that table. You cannot purchase genuine love with a line of credit. You cannot earn basic respect by making yourself a convenient utility. When you consistently rescue people from the consequences of their own actions, you do not teach them gratitude. You teach them dependence. And, more dangerously, you teach them that your boundaries do not actually exist. To the person who always feels like they are standing on the outside looking in, even when they own the building, it is not your fault that they are blind to your value. But it is your profound responsibility to stop funding their selective blindness. Walking away from toxic bloodlines is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of profound self-preservation. It is the moment you finally realize that the empty chair they offer you is not a place of honor. It is a trap designed to keep you small, compliant, and paying. I stared at the glowing words on the small screen. The heavy, suffocating weight I had carried since childhood began to lift. The obligation was gone. I hit save. I closed the app. The drive from the restaurant back to my luxury hotel in downtown Charleston took exactly 14 minutes. I drove with the absolute precision of a machine. My hands were steady on the steering wheel, my breathing slow and completely regulated. The vibrant, historic streets of the city blurred past my windows, filled with tourists and couples enjoying their Friday night. I felt completely detached from all of it. The stinging humiliation I had experienced at the door had thoroughly evaporated, leaving behind a cold, clinical determination. I handed the keys to the hotel valet, walked through the opulent lobby, and rode the elevator to the 12th floor. The air conditioning in my suite was crisp and silent. I did not take off my tailored blazer. I did not pour myself a drink from the minibar. I walked straight to the mahogany writing desk, opened my laptop, and connected to the secure corporate server of my firm in Atlanta. I opened the dedicated file labeled with Tyler's name. Inside were the heavily authenticated PDF documents representing $75,000 in guaranteed capital. There were 2 primary contracts. The first was the master lease agreement for the commercial kitchen equipment, encompassing the ovens, the refrigeration units, and the custom ventilation systems. The second was the retainer agreement for the elite public relations firm Patricia had insisted upon hiring to secure Eleanor's attention. Both contracts contained the exact same customized clause, buried on page 14 under the heading of Financial Oversight. It explicitly stated that the guarantor retained the unilateral right to freeze all pending and future disbursements if the primary operator obstructed, denied, or circumvented the guarantor's right to physically inspect the premises and audit the operational launch. Patricia had told the most important investor in the room that I was merely a hired accountant and ordered me to the service entrance. She had explicitly and publicly denied my role and my access. By trying to protect Tyler's fragile ego, she had legally triggered the kill switch on his entire enterprise. I opened my secure email client. The cursor blinked steadily against the stark white background. I felt no lingering sadness. I felt no hesitation. When you look at a balance sheet that is bleeding capital due to gross mismanagement and fraudulent representation, you do not mourn the loss. You execute the protocol. The screen went dark. I woke up on Saturday morning to the sound of seagulls outside my window and the vibration of my phone on the nightstand. It was 9:30. The caller ID displayed Patricia's name for a brief, irrational second. The old Lauren, the daughter who still craved validation, wondered if she was calling to apologize. I wondered if the guilt of turning me away at the door had kept her awake. If she had finally realized the sheer magnitude of her cruelty. I picked up the phone. I did not say hello. I just let the line open. "Lauren, where are you?" Patricia's voice was sharp, impatient, and entirely devoid of remorse. She sounded exactly like a manager reprimanding a negligent employee. "Tyler's trying to coordinate the final floral deliveries for the public opening on Monday. And the vendor is saying there's a hold on the account. Did you put the wrong billing address on the authorization form again? I sat up against the crisp white hotel pillows. The audacity was breathtaking. Less than 14 hours ago, she had treated me like a stray dog in front of Charleston High Society. And now, without skipping a beat, without a single word acknowledging the event, she was demanding that I fix a billing issue. I did not put the wrong address. Patricia, I said. My voice was perfectly level, stripped of any familial warmth. Well, then fix it, she snapped, clearly irritated by my tone. Eleanor is bringing 2 other major investors on Monday for the ribbon cutting. The hydrangeas need to be flawless. Call the bank and expedite the clearance. And honestly, Lauren, you could have at least texted me that you went back to the hotel last night. Tyler was very stressed. She actually believed her own reality. She had completely rewritten the narrative in her mind, in her version of events. I hadn't been banished to a service alley. I had simply failed to perform my duties and rudely abandoned my brother on his big night. She viewed my presence as a mere utility, and my absence as a logistical inconvenience. I am not calling the bank, I stated quietly. Excuse me, the sharp edge in her voice returned. What is your problem today? We don't have time for your sensitivity right now. I looked at the closed laptop on the desk. They really had no idea what was coming. I ended the call. I placed the phone gently face down on the bedside table. Patricia's demanding tone still echoed in the quiet hotel room, but it held absolutely no power over me anymore. It was simply the sound of a system crashing, desperately trying to reboot a program that had already been permanently deleted. She didn't want a daughter. She wanted a limitless credit limit with 0 boundaries. I want to ask you something. Have you ever reached that exact moment of absolute clarity, the moment where you look at a toxic relationship and realize you hold the power to simply turn off the tap? Drop a comment below with the word boundary if you have ever frozen a card or cut a tie to protect your own peace. If this resonates with you, hit that like button. I walked over to the mahogany desk and opened my laptop. I pulled up the draft emails I had meticulously prepared the night before. The first email was addressed to the Chief Financial Officer of the Commercial Kitchen Leasing Company. The subject line read, Formal Revocation of Guarantor Authorization, Tyler Coastal Cuisine Account. The body of the text was incredibly brief. This email serves as formal and immediate notice that I, Lauren, am executing my right to revoke the financial guarantee on the above-referenced account, effective immediately, citing a breach of the oversight clause. All pending invoices, including the $75,000 final equipment balance, are hereby transferred solely to the primary operator, Tyler. I do not authorize any further charges against my corporate or personal accounts. I carbon copied my corporate attorney in Atlanta on the thread. I copied the exact same text, changed the recipient details, and drafted the second email to the elite public relations firm. They had a strict policy of pulling their media coordination if the final retainer was not cleared 48 hours before a public launch. I sat there for exactly 1 minute. I thought about Tyler, likely sleeping off his perceived triumph, completely unaware that his financial lifeline was about to be severed. I thought about Patricia, angrily trying to call the florist. And I thought about little Mia, eating cold fries in a storage room. I moved the cursor. I clicked send on the first email. Then I clicked send on the second. The trap was set. The responses from the vendors did not take long. In the corporate financial world, Emails containing the phrase revocation of guarantee trigger immediate, systematic panic. It is the equivalent of yelling fire in a crowded theatre. The legal language I used was cold, indisputable, and heavily backed by the reputation of my Atlanta firm. At exactly 10:45 that Saturday morning, my inbox chimed. It was the CFO of the kitchen leasing company. His reply was professional and remarkably swift. Receipt acknowledged. We are placing an immediate freeze on the account. Our logistics team will be dispatched to the venue on Monday morning to secure and extract the unpaid assets unless an alternative funding source clears the $75,000 balance in full by 8 a.m. 20 minutes later, the director of the public relations firm replied, "Notice received. All press releases, media invites, and influencer coordination for the Monday grand opening are suspended immediately pending payment from the primary operator." The mechanism was completely automated now. I didn't need to argue with Tyler. I didn't need to try and reason with Gary. I certainly didn't need to endure another demeaning conversation with Patricia. I had effectively cut the main breaker to their glittering, expensive house of cards. The electricity was off, and they were simply running on the rapidly depleting battery of their own arrogance. I closed the email client and shut the laptop. The silence in the hotel room was profound and deeply satisfying. I walked over to the minibar, bypassed the alcohol, and poured myself a glass of sparkling water. I stood by the window, looking out over the historic Charleston Harbor. The water was calm and reflecting the bright morning sun. For the first time in 34 years, I felt no functional over-responsibility. I felt no crushing guilt for refusing to save my brother from his own incompetence. I had drawn a line in concrete, not sand. The deposits were gone, burned in the fire of Tyler's initial setup. I accepted that loss as the final tuition payment for my freedom. But the massive debt, the crippling weight of the enterprise, now rested exactly where it belonged. The money was gone. Many people do not fully understand how corporate finance operates. They mistakenly believe that a verbal promise, a shared bloodline, or a tearful apology can somehow override a notarized legal document. In my family, manipulation was the primary currency. Patricia and Gary operated under the delusion that because I was their daughter, my financial resources were simply an extension of their own inherent rights. They never respected the process. Allow me to explain the precise architecture of their downfall. When I agreed to back Tyler's restaurant, I did not sign a standard, open-ended personal guarantee. I utilized a specific instrument known as a guarantor revocable trust agreement. It is a highly protective financial structure designed for high-risk investments. The core mechanism is simple but devastatingly effective. The guarantor provides the financial backing but conditionally retains absolute oversight authority. If the primary operator in this case, Tyler, fails to meet operational milestones, or, critically, if he obstructs the guarantor's right to inspect the business, the guarantee can be instantly revoked. When Patricia stopped me at the service entrance, she did not just insult me personally. By publicly declaring to the restaurant's most crucial potential investor that I was merely a hired accountant, and by explicitly denying me entry to the main event space, she acted as Tyler's authorized agent to completely breach the oversight clause. She legally documented his failure to comply with the terms of our financial arrangement. The vendor companies did not care about our family dynamics. They did not care that Patricia wanted to protect Tyler's fragile ego or maintain a wealthy facade for Eleanor. They only cared about their exposure to risk. When a senior partner from a major Atlanta firm formally notifies them that the operational oversight clause has been severely breached and the guarantee is withdrawn, their automated risk management protocols take over immediately. I did not need to scream at my mother in a crowded parking lot. I did not need to embarrass my brother in front of his wealthy guests. Retribution, when executed properly, does not require a raised voice. It requires an airtight contract and the absolute willingness to enforce it. The paperwork simply crushes the lies under the immense weight of legal reality. The ink was dry. Sunday in Charleston was remarkably quiet. I spent the morning enjoying a slow, meticulous breakfast in my hotel suite, watching the sailboats drift across the harbour. The frantic, anxious energy that usually accompanied my family interactions was completely absent. I had a brief, encrypted video call with my corporate attorney in Atlanta just before noon. He confirmed that both the kitchen leasing conglomerate and the public relations firm had fully processed the revocation notices. The financial freeze was absolute and irreversible. If you have ever spent years absorbing the blame for a narcissist only to finally compile the exact receipts needed to walk away cleanly, drop a "ready" in the comments below. If you understand the profound peace of letting someone else face their own consequences, hit that like button. I spent the afternoon organizing my digital files. I created a dedicated, secure folder containing every signed document, every email correspondence, and the time-stamped revocation notices. I printed physical copies at the hotel business center and placed them neatly into a slim leather portfolio. This was my shield. Meanwhile, just a few miles away, Tyler was undoubtedly living in a state of euphoric ignorance. He was likely practicing his grand ribbon-cutting speech in the mirror, rehearsing the humble narrative of a self-made culinary genius. Patricia was probably calling the local socialites, confirming their attendance for the Monday lunch service. They were floating on a beautiful, expensive cloud, entirely unaware that the structural supports had already been vaporized. I packed my suitcase with slow, deliberate precision. I folded my tailored suits. I arranged my travel documents. I felt a profound sense of closure. For over a decade, I had been the anxious fixer, constantly waiting for the next disastrous phone call, perpetually ready to wire funds to patch up their mistakes. Tonight, my phone sat completely silent on the mahogany desk. I ordered room service. I read a book. I slept deeply and continuously through the night for the first time in memory. Monday was approaching fast. Sunday evening settled over the city, casting long shadows across the historic architecture. I thought about Gloria's words. I was no longer the rock they could strike with their entitlement. I had transformed into a completely different element. I was the auditor, and the final balance sheet was entirely unforgiving. The beautiful facade of Tyler's coastal cuisine was going to meet the harsh reality of corporate accounting at precisely 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. I set my alarm, turned off the bedside lamp, and closed my eyes. The storm was ready. I checked out of my luxury suite at 7:30 on Monday morning. The air was crisp, carrying the promise of a bright, beautiful day. I drove my rental car to the street opposite Tyler's restaurant and parked in a discreet spot shaded by a large oak tree. I did not go there to gloat. I went there to witness the definitive end of my profound over-responsibility. The grand public opening was scheduled for noon, the local press, the carefully curated influencers, and Eleanor's entire network of wealthy associates were expected to arrive in just a few hours. At exactly 8 o'clock, the serene morning was violently interrupted. It was not the arrival of fresh produce deliveries or boutique floral arrangements. Instead, 3 massive, heavy-duty transport vehicles belonging to the commercial kitchen leasing conglomerate rumbled down the pristine street and blocked the restaurant's loading dock. Men in grey work shirts stepped out, carrying heavy steel clipboards and industrial dollies. Tyler arrived 10 minutes later in his expensive, heavily financed sports car. I watched through my windshield as he stepped out, holding a designer coffee cup, his hair perfectly styled. The confusion on his face was immediate. He walked briskly toward the transport team, waving his free hand, clearly demanding that they move their unsightly trucks away from his beautiful entrance. The lead foreman did not smile. He did not defer to Tyler's arrogant posture. He simply handed Tyler a printed copy of the repossession order. Even from across the street, I could pinpoint the exact second the reality fractured his golden illusion. Tyler dropped his coffee. The cup shattered on the pavement, splashing dark liquid across his expensive shoes. He grabbed his phone, his fingers moving frantically across the screen. Patricia's luxury SUV sped into the parking lot moments later. She practically fell out of the driver's seat, rushing to her precious son's side. She started arguing aggressively with the foreman, pointing a manicured finger at his chest. The foreman remained completely unfazed. He tapped his clipboard, signaled his crew, and they began rolling the heavy dollies toward the back doors. They were going inside to extract the ovens, the ventilation hoods, and the commercial refrigerators. The illusion was finally breaking. The PR firm had undoubtedly sent their cancellation notices by now as well. Tyler's phone was likely flooding with automated alerts. Without the kitchen equipment, there could be no menu. Without the PR firm, there would be no managed press coverage. Without the $75,000, he was nothing but an arrogant man standing in front of an empty, leased shell. I watched Patricia physically try to block the service doors, her desperation entirely pathetic. The same doors she had so cruelly banished me to just 3 nights ago were now the exact entry point for her son's utter ruin. It was perfect symmetry. My phone began to vibrate violently in the cup holder at exactly 8:45. The screen flashed bright with Patricia's name. I let it vibrate 3 times, watching the chaotic scene unfold across the street, before calmly pressing the green icon to accept the call. The vehicle's Bluetooth system engaged. She did not say hello. She did not ask how I was doing. "Lauren, what have you done?" Patricia's voice was not just sharp, it was unhinged. The frantic, high-pitched scream filled the quiet interior of my rental car. "The vendor is here. They have men inside the restaurant. They are literally unbolting the commercial ovens." "Lauren, they are taking the ovens." I adjusted the volume dial down by 2 notches. My heart rate did not elevate. My palms did not sweat. I withdrew my financial guarantee. "Patricia," I stated, my voice smooth, level, and entirely devoid of emotional inflection. The revocation was processed according to the terms of the legal contract. "Are you insane?" she shrieked, the panic completely consuming her carefully maintained socialite persona. "Eleanor is bringing her entire investment board here in 3 hours. You are ruining your brother's life. You are doing this out of pure petty jealousy because Tyler is finally succeeding. I listened to her desperate narrative spin wildly out of control. It was fascinating, in a clinical sort of way, to hear how quickly she reverted to blaming me for the structural failures of her golden child. An accounting consultant does not pay for commercial ovens, Patricia, I replied quietly. You explicitly defined my role to your primary investor on Friday night. I am simply acting in accordance with the professional boundaries you established. That was just to keep things simple for Eleanor. She cried out, her breathing ragged. You know how she is. She wants self-made founders. You are a vindictive, cruel daughter. Call the bank right now and authorize the $75,000. Call them right now. Lauren. The account is frozen. The funds are permanently withdrawn. I said. You have 3 hours to find an alternative capital source. I let her scream. After everything we have done for you. Patricia sobbed, employing the ultimate weapon of maternal guilt that had worked on me for decades. We raised you, we gave you a home, and you destroy your family over a bruised ego. If your father has another heart palpitation over this stress, it is entirely on your hands. The old Lauren would have crumbled. The old Lauren would have panicked, apologized, and desperately tried to reverse the wire transfers. But sitting in that car, listening to the hollow threats, I felt absolutely nothing. My ego is perfectly intact. I answered smoothly. Tyler's balance sheet is what you should be worrying about. I strongly suggest you stop yelling at me and start calling emergency lenders. Her voice cracked completely. There was a muffled scuffle on the other end of the line, followed by the sound of heavy, frantic breathing. Tyler had snatched the phone away from our mother. When he spoke, he completely bypassed the anger and immediately deployed the charismatic, golden boy charm he used on investors. Lauren, hey, it's Tyler, he said, forcing a nervous chuckle. Listen, things got a little out of hand on Friday. Mum was just stressed about the VIPs. You know how she gets. Let's not let a silly misunderstanding ruin years of hard work. Please, Lauren, this is my live stream. You can't do this today. I looked across the street. Tyler was pacing near the curb, a hand running desperately through his styled hair. The transport men were currently loading a massive stainless steel refrigeration unit onto the lift gate. It wasn't a misunderstanding. Tyler, I said, my tone remaining strictly transactional. It was a fundamental breach of our financial agreement. You denied me oversight access. The charm vanished instantly, replaced by sheer, unadulterated panic. I will pay you back, I swear. Lauren, I will draft a new agreement right now. I will give you 10% interest, 20%. Just call the leasing company and tell them to put the ovens back in the kitchen. Eleanor is going to be here at noon. You cannot pay me 20% interest on $75,000 when you possess zero liquid capital. I replied, clinically, you are functionally insolvent, Tyler. I am foreclosing on the bad debt. Desperation makes people ugly. When he realized I was completely impervious to his begging, he turned on the very person who had enabled him his entire life. This is Mom's fault, Tyler yelled into the receiver, throwing Patricia under the proverbial bus without a second thought. She is the one who told you to go to the service door. I didn't want that. She forced you away. Punish her. Lauren, don't punish my business. It was the most clarifying sentence he could have ever spoken. He didn't care about our mother. He didn't care about me. He only cared about his unearned status. He was perfectly willing to sacrifice anyone to maintain his glittering illusion. The signature on the corporate guarantee was yours. Tyler, I said softly. The liability is entirely yours. He had nothing left. You are a monster. Tyler spat, his voice dropping into a vicious, hateful register I had never heard before. You have always been jealous of me. You sit in your sterile corporate office making money, but you have no vision. You have no passion. You are just a cold, calculating machine. I am a machine that just stopped printing your money. I agreed easily. I recommend you focus your passion on explaining to the health inspector why you no longer have a functional ventilation system. I watched him kick the tire of his car in blind rage. The power dynamic, skewed for 34 years, had permanently flipped. He was no longer the cherished prince demanding tribute. He was simply a highly leveraged debtor facing immediate liquidation. The dynamic was broken. Tyler realized that insults were completely ineffective. His restaurant was literally being dismantled before his eyes. So, like a cornered animal, he lunged for the most vulnerable, repulsive weapon he could find. He played his final card. If this restaurant fails today, Lauren, I go completely bankrupt. Tyler said, his voice dropping to a low, threatening hiss. Do you understand what that means? How am I supposed to pay my court-ordered child support? What happens to Mia? Are you really going to let your own niece suffer just to teach me a lesson? He was using the 8-year-old child he had hidden in a concrete storage room just 3 days ago as a human shield. The sheer sociopathy of the threat was breathtaking. My blood turned to absolute ice, but my voice remained as steady and unyielding as a steel vault. Do not ever use the daughter you hid in a closet as a negotiation tactic with me. I stated. The words cut through the digital connection like a scalpel. Mia's private school tuition is already paid in full for the next academic year. I transferred the funds directly to the institution on Friday morning. Her essential needs are entirely met, independently of your financial failures. Tyler was completely silent on the other end. He had no idea I had bypassed him entirely to secure her education. His ultimate leverage was instantly neutralized. You are a negligent father and a fraudulent businessman. I continued, my voice devoid of any sisterly affection. Your daughter will be perfectly fine. You, however, have a $75,000 balance due to the equipment conglomerate and a ruined reputation in the Charleston investment community. Lauren, please. His voice broke, a pathetic, genuine whine of total defeat. Good luck with Eleanor at noon, I said. I did not wait for his response. I moved my thumb across the glowing screen and severed the connection. I immediately went into my phone settings and permanently blocked Tyler's number. I blocked Patricia's number. I blocked Gary's number. I placed the phone down on the passenger seat. I looked across the street one last time. The transport trucks were securing their heavy doors. The kitchen was gone. I shifted the car into drive. I ended the call. As I drove away from the harbour, leaving the chaotic wreckage of Tyler's unearned dream behind me. The physical sensation in my chest was extraordinary. I had anticipated feeling a heavy burden of residual guilt, the lingering ghost of the functional over-responsibility that had dictated my entire adult life. But there was nothing. The space where the anxiety and the desperation to be loved used to reside was now filled with a profound, unshakable tranquility. I merged onto the highway heading back toward Atlanta. The rearview mirror showed the historic Charleston skyline shrinking into the distance. I had finally stopped trying to purchase an authentic connection with counterfeit people. The cost of my absolute freedom was high, but looking at the road stretching out clearly in front of me, I knew it was the best investment I had ever made. The transaction was complete. The email arrived in my secure corporate inbox at precisely 10 o'clock on Tuesday morning. The sender was a prominent, highly aggressive boutique litigation firm based in Charleston. The subject line was drafted to incite maximum anxiety, urgent notice of intent to sue for tortious interference and breach of oral contract, Tyler Coastal Cuisine. I opened the document while taking a slow, measured sip of my morning coffee. The letter was a masterpiece of legal intimidation. Tyler and Patricia had clearly woven a deeply fabricated narrative for this attorney. The document alleged that my financial guarantee was, in fact, an irrevocable oral gift promised to my brother, and that my sudden withdrawal of funds was a malicious, calculated act of sabotage designed to intentionally destroy his business launch. They demanded the immediate reinstatement of the $75,000 credit line, plus an additional $20,000 for emotional distress and putational damage. Or they would file a massive lawsuit by Friday. They expected me to panic. They expected the intimidating letterhead to force me back into my designated role of the compliant, terrified ATM. They were profoundly mistaken. I did not call my own legal team. I did not need to. I simply clicked reply. My response was devoid of any emotion, defense, or counter-accusation. I maintained the absolute, clinical precision of an auditor addressing a mathematical error. "Counselor," I typed, "I am in receipt of your demand letter. Please find the attached PDF document, specifically Addendum B, Section 4, titled Guarantor Oversight and Absolute Revocation Authority. You will note that your client, Tyler, signed and notarized this legally binding agreement 3 months ago. The clause grants me the unilateral right to freeze all capital if I am denied operational inspection." On Friday evening, Patricia, acting as the venue's host, publicly denied me entry. The revocation is structurally flawless and legally unassailable. I suggest you review the documents your client failed to provide you before threatening a senior partner at a financial firm with frivolous litigation. I attached the heavily watermarked, digitally verified contract and hit send. The strategy of the false counterattack relies entirely on the victim's ignorance. Tyler had lied to his own lawyer, hoping a scary letter would break my resolve before anyone checked the actual paperwork. I did not have to wait long for the resolution. At 11:15, a new email appeared from the Charleston attorney. It was exceptionally brief. "Ms. Lauren, receipt of the contract is acknowledged. Our firm was not made aware of this signed addendum. Please be advised that we are formally withdrawing our representation of Tyler in this matter, effective immediately. Have a good day." The final threat was neutralized in exactly 75 minutes. Tyler had tried to bluff an auditor with forged numbers, and he had completely bankrupted his last remaining ounce of credibility in the process. The game was over. The collapse of Tyler's culinary empire was not a sudden, dramatic explosion. It was a slow, agonizing, and highly public structural failure. I observed the fallout from the quiet safety of my office in Atlanta, receiving occasional, entirely unsolicited updates through the expansive network of Southern socialites and business vendors. Without the commercial ovens and the specialized ventilation systems, the restaurant was nothing more than an expensive, empty dining room. The highly anticipated public launch on Monday was abruptly cancelled. A vague, handwritten sign citing unforeseen mechanical issues was taped to the grand oak doors. But in a city like Charleston, the truth travels much faster than a carefully managed public relations statement. Eleanor, the billionaire investor Patricia, had desperately tried to impress, pulled her entire funding commitment by Wednesday afternoon. She was a woman who deeply valued integrity and hard work. When her financial team investigated the sudden vendor repossessions, they quickly uncovered the staggering amount of leveraged debt and the complete lack of operational capital. Eleanor realized the self-made visionary was merely a heavily subsidized illusion. She severed all ties, and her quiet departure essentially blacklisted Tyler from any future investments in the district. The financial gravity finally hit Patricia and Gary. The $75,000 for the equipment was no longer my liability. But the broken commercial lease for the waterfront property was entirely in their names. The secondary loans they had taken out against their own comfortable retirement home to fund the designer interiors were now instantly due. They were drowning in a sea of debt they had enthusiastically co-signed. I did not rejoice in their misery. I felt no vindictive thrill watching Patricia lose her coveted social standing when the local country club realized her family was functionally insolvent. It was simply the inevitable mathematical consequence of their own profound arrogance. You cannot build a massive, glittering castle on a foundation of lies and expect it to withstand a strong gust of wind. They had spent 20 years training me to be their safety net. When the safety net finally decided it had absorbed enough damage and simply moved away, they were forced to experience the terrifying freefall they had always avoided. Gary eventually had to list their beautiful family home for sale just to satisfy the commercial creditors. Tyler was forced to take a mid-level line cook position at a chain restaurant 2 towns over, entirely stripped of his unearned executive title. I did not intervene. I did not offer a loan. I simply watched the balance sheet correct itself. The debt was paid. Financial security is an incredibly powerful tool when applied to the right foundation. For my entire adult life, I had poured my resources into a bottomless pit of entitlement. Now, with the heavy burden of my family's manufactured crises completely removed, I redirected my capital towards something that actually possessed the capacity to grow. I focused entirely on Mia. I sat down with my wealth management team and drafted a highly structured, irrevocable education trust. This legal instrument was explicitly designed to bypass Tyler and Patricia entirely. I deposited a substantial sum and amount previously earmarked for my brother's endless emergencies into a high-yield account strictly designated for Mia's university tuition and essential living expenses. The trust was managed by an independent third-party fiduciary. Tyler could not touch a single cent of it to pay off his restaurant debts. Patricia could not borrow against it to maintain her country club membership. It was completely locked. It was secure. It was safe. 2 months after the restaurant debacle, I drove to Mia's hometown. I didn't visit my parents' house. I parked outside the modest apartment where Mia lived with her mother. I had arranged to take her shopping for the upcoming academic year. When Mia ran out the front door and hugged my waist, the contrast between her genuine, uncomplicated joy and the toxic, transactional affection of my parents was staggering. We spent the entire afternoon walking through the aisles of a high-end supply store. I bought her the premium coloured pencils, the expensive ergonomic backpack, and the telescope she had circled in a science catalogue. "Aunt Lauren," Mia asked quietly as we loaded the bright shopping bags into the trunk of my car, "Dad said you were mad at us. He said you took his kitchen away." I knelt down so I was exactly at her eye level. I looked at her sweet, untainted face. "I am not mad at you, Mia. I will never be mad at you," I said gently. "Your dad and I just had a disagreement about a business contract. But I want you to know that your future is completely safe. You never have to worry about school. I have it covered." She smiled, a bright, relieved expression that completely melted the last frozen remnants of my cynical armor. She didn't care about VIP parties or billionaire investors. She just wanted to know she was seen. I hugged her tightly. 6 months passed with relative silence. The chaotic noise of my family had been effectively muted by the heavy, impenetrable walls of my established boundaries. In Atlanta, my career flourished without the constant, draining distraction of managing Tyler's crises. My professional focus was absolute. I was officially elevated to senior partner at my firm. The promotion brought significant wealth, but more importantly, it brought a profound, unshakable peace. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, an email arrived in my personal inbox. It was from Gary. It was the first direct communication I had received from him since the morning the restaurant was repossessed. I opened the message with a clinical, detached curiosity. "Lauren," he wrote, "the house sold yesterday. We are moving into a smaller townhome on the edge of the city. Tyler is struggling. Patricia is deeply depressed. I know I should have spoken up that night at the restaurant door. I stood there and let her treat you like a stranger. And I was a coward. I am sorry. I hope one day you can find it in your heart to forgive us and help this family heal." I read the text 3 times. It was an apology, yes, but it was heavily laced with the familiar, subtle poison of functional over-responsibility. He was still subtly asking me to help the family heal. He was still looking for the emergency fund to step in and fix the emotional deficit. I did not feel angry. I just felt incredibly tired of their repetitive script. I clicked reply and typed a very brief response. "Dad, I accept your apology for your silence at the door. I sincerely wish you and Mom the best in your new home. However, my financial and emotional boundaries remain permanent. I cannot fix the dynamics you chose to build. I love you, but I will not participate in this cycle anymore." I hit send. I left the door open a fraction of an inch for genuine honesty, but I kept the heavy security chain firmly locked. That evening, I had a video call with Aunt Gloria. I sat in my spacious, sunlit living room, holding a warm cup of Earl Grey tea. We talked about her landscaping business, my recent promotion, and Mia's excellent grades in science class. We didn't mention Patricia or Tyler once. I looked at the quiet serenity of my apartment. I had built a beautiful, secure life. It was finally mine. People often ask me if I regret the loss of my family. They ask if the profound, terrifying silence that follows a permanently severed bloodline is worth the financial and emotional independence. I always tell them the exact same thing. I did not lose a family at the service entrance of that restaurant in Charleston. I simply lost a group of heavily indebted dependents who were wearing the highly convincing masks of a mother, a father, and a brother. The deposits I lost on the commercial equipment were not a tragic waste of capital. They were the absolute, non-negotiable price of my total emancipation. If you are currently sitting in the dark, meticulously calculating how much more of your soul, your time, or your bank account You need to sacrifice before the people you love finally decide you are worthy of the front door. Please hear me. You cannot buy validation from a bankrupt heart. You cannot earn a seat at a table that was explicitly designed to exclude you. A boundary is not a weapon of revenge. It is an instrument of profound self-respect. It is the moment you finally look at the people exploiting your inherent goodness and say, I am worth significantly more than the utility I provide. Tyler lost a restaurant. Patricia lost her socialite facade. Gary lost his comfortable retirement. But I gained the most valuable asset in the human experience, the absolute ownership of my own life. I now spend my time and my capital nurturing the things that truly matter. I protect Mia. I build my career. I surround myself with people like Gloria who demand nothing from my wallet and everything from my character. Legacy is a word we often misuse. We think it is about the money we leave behind, the businesses we build, or the prestigious name we carry. But that is just accounting. Legacy isn't what you inherit. It is what you protect. If my story resonated with you, if you have ever had to become the villain in someone else's narrative just to survive your own, please hit the like button and share this video. Subscribe to the channel for more stories about navigating the complex, often painful reality of family dynamics. I finally belong here. It took 34 years to realize that I did not need to fight for a place in their glittering, fragile house of cards. I had the power, the resources, and the intelligence to build my own fortress. I look forward to reading your comments and seeing how many of you have found the courage to sign your own Declaration of Independence. I didn't look back.